The night was darker than usual, heavy clouds covering even the faintest glow of the moon. Inside the glass-walled mansion at the heart of Snow Paolo's wealthiest district, silence was expected, but silence was nowhere to be found. The twins cried. Again. Their wails echoed through the high-ceilinged corridors like a haunting melody that refused to end. For 3 consecutive weeks, sleep had been a stranger inside the Pereira household. Doctors had been called. Therapists had been paid. Nurses had tried everything from herbal baths to imported white noise machines, but nothing worked. And yet tonight was different, because in less than an hour, something would happen. Something no one in that mansion could have imagined. Something that would reveal a truth far deeper than restless children. Arthur Pereira was a man used to control. At 39, he was already a household name in Brazil's corporate scene. The press often called him the Steel CEO because of his sharp decisions, his cold negotiation skills, and the fortune he had built in less than 2 decades. His empire spanned from real estate towers to cutting-edge technology firms. People bowed when he entered the room. Investors feared his silence more than they feared bankruptcy. But tonight, all his money, all his power, and all his brilliance were useless, because there he was standing helpless by the cribs of his infant daughters, Sophia and Helena, unable to soothe their endless cries. He glanced at his wife, Isabella, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, her face pale from exhaustion. She had been an elegant woman once, known in socialite magazines for her refined posture, her designer gowns, and her calm smile. But the past weeks had drained all traces of glamour. Her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, her hair tangled, her voice hoarse. "They won't stop, Arthur," she whispered, almost breaking. "Why won't they stop?" Arthur clenched his jaw. He hated losing control, and tonight he had lost it completely. The doctors had reassured them repeatedly. "They're healthy, Mr. Pereira, perfectly healthy. There's no medical reason for this sleeplessness. It's just a phase." But a phase didn't last this long. A phase didn't make their babies scream for hours every night until dawn. A phase didn't make Isabella cry silently into her pillow when she thought Arthur wasn't watching. Something was wrong. He knew it. And yet, what could he do? It was past midnight when he heard the faint sound of soft steps on marble. Turning his head, Arthur noticed a figure lingering by the door. It was Clara, the maid. She was young only 23, but her presence seemed older, calmer. She had joined the household only 6 months ago, a recommendation from a distant cousin of Isabella's. At first, Arthur hadn't paid much attention to her. In his world, maids came and went. But lately, he had noticed something strange. Clara often seemed to appear in the right place at the right time, almost as if she anticipated needs before they were spoken. Now she stood silently, her hands folded nervously, her eyes locked on the twins. "Do you need something, Clara?" Arthur's voice was sharper than intended. The young woman hesitated before answering. "Forgive me, sir. I couldn't ignore the crying. I know I shouldn't interfere, but—" She paused, biting her lip. "May I try something?" Arthur narrowed his eyes. Interference was the last thing he wanted. But before he could dismiss her, Isabella spoke, desperation in her tone. "Let her try, Arthur. Please. We've tried everything else." Arthur's pride screamed no. He was a man of solutions, not of improvisations from a maid. But the look in Isabella's eyes, the quiet despair, the last thread of hope, softened him. Against every instinct, he gave a short nod. Clara walked closer. The twins screamed louder, almost as if testing her. But she didn't flinch. She reached into the crib, her movements slow and deliberate, and whispered something neither Arthur nor Isabella could hear. Then she lifted Sophia into her arms, cradling her carefully. Arthur watched, arms crossed, his chest tight. He wanted to believe this was nonsense, and yet something shifted. The baby's cries softened, then stopped, completely. Isabella gasped. Clara hummed softly, a lullaby so old that Arthur couldn't even place its origin. Helena, still lying in the crib, turned her head toward the sound, her cries faltering, then fading. Within minutes, both babies were silent, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The mansion, for the first time in weeks, was quiet. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. What had just happened? For the first time in his life, Arthur Pereira, the man who had built skyscrapers and crushed competitors, felt powerless before a maid, and yet grateful. He cleared his throat, his voice unusually hesitant. How did you do that?" Clara's eyes met his, steady but humble. "It's just a song, sir. My grandmother used to sing it when nothing else worked." Arthur didn't believe in just. Nothing in his world was just. Everything had a reason, a price, a consequence. And yet the evidence was right there in front of him. 2 peaceful, sleeping babies. Isabella pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, not of exhaustion this time, but of relief. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Arthur said nothing, but in his silence, questions multiplied. Who exactly was Clara? Why had her lullaby worked when nothing else had? And why did her calmness feel so unsettling, almost as if she knew something they didn't? Arthur wasn't a man who trusted coincidences. And tonight he silently promised himself he would find out everything about the maid who had just done the impossible. Because in his world, nothing was ever simple. Nothing. And so, what had begun as another sleepless night in the Pereira mansion had become the opening to a mystery one that would shake not only Arthur's family, but his empire, his legacy, and the very foundations of the life he thought he controlled. The following morning, sunlight pierced through the enormous glass windows of the Pereira mansion. The polished marble floors reflected the glow like mirrors, but the house itself felt oddly different. It was quieter, almost peaceful. Arthur Pereira sat alone in the dining hall, sipping his black coffee. The silence settled him. For 3 weeks, his mornings had been defined by exhaustion, by the sound of babies still crying when dawn arrived, by his wife's hollow eyes. But today, nothing. It should have been a relief. It should have felt like victory. Yet Arthur's instincts told him otherwise. Clara. The image of her holding Sophia last night replayed in his mind, as vivid as if it had just happened. Her calmness, the lullaby, the way the twins had responded instantly. It wasn't luck. Arthur didn't believe in luck. It was something else, and that unsettled him more than the endless crying ever had. He had built his empire by detecting patterns where others saw chaos, by uncovering truths others ignored. And his gut told him Clara was more than she seemed. He placed his cup down, his jaw tight. He needed answers. Isabella entered the hall, a few minutes later, her hair brushed, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. Her face, though pale, carried the faintest trace of relief. "They slept," she said softly, almost as if she didn't believe her own words. "Arthur, they actually slept through the night." Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I noticed." She gave him a fragile smile. "It's because of Clara." He didn't reply. Isabella hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Maybe we should keep her closer to the babies. At least until this phase passes. She clearly has something that soothes them." Arthur's jaw tightened. He hated the idea of depending on anyone, let alone a maid. But arguing now would only worsen the situation. So he simply nodded, though his mind was already elsewhere, calculating, observing, preparing. Later that day, when the house was buzzing with routine, Arthur made a discreet phone call from his office overlooking the city. "Find everything you can about Clara Duarte," he instructed his private investigator, a man who had worked for him for over a decade. Background, family, past employment, everything. I want a full report. Of course, Mr. Pereira, came the crisp reply. Arthur ended the call, his gaze fixed on the skyline. He had learned long ago that threats rarely came from the outside. They came from within, from the people closest to you, the ones who blended into your daily life until it was too late. He wasn't going to be blindsided, not in business, not in his family. That evening, Arthur watched from the doorway as Clara once again entered the nursery. The twins began fussing the moment the lights dimmed, but Clara approached without fear. She hummed the same melody, rocking them gently. Within minutes, they were asleep again, their tiny fists unclenched, their faces serene. Isabella stood beside Arthur, tears in her eyes. "Look at them," she whispered. "Do you realize what she's doing for us? For them?" Arthur's eyes never left Clara. "Yes," he muttered. "I realize it very well." Days passed, and the pattern repeated itself. Every night, Clara's lullaby worked. Every morning, Isabella seemed stronger, her energy slowly returning. The mansion, once consumed by exhaustion, began to breathe again. But Arthur's suspicion only deepened. The investigator's report arrived on the 4th day. Arthur read it carefully, line by line. Name, Clara Duarte. Age, 23. Background, grew up in a small rural town in the interior of Minas Gerais. Raised by her grandmother after her parents passed away in an accident. Completed only high school. No criminal record. Previous employment, domestic worker in 2 middle-class households. Everything seemed ordinary. Too ordinary. Arthur tapped the report with his finger, frowning. People didn't just appear with flawless backgrounds. Everyone had a weakness, a secret, a flaw. He knew that better than anyone. And yet Clara seemed like a blank slate. One evening, Arthur decided to test her. After dinner, when Isabella went upstairs, he called Clara into his office. The room was intimidating, by design floor-to-ceiling shelves of law and business books, a massive desk of dark oak, city lights glittering beyond the panoramic window. Clara entered hesitantly, folding her hands in front of her apron. "Yes, sir?" Arthur studied her carefully, his tone measured. "I read in your file that you were raised by your grandmother. She must have been a remarkable woman." Clara's eyes softened briefly. "She was. She taught me everything I know." Arthur leaned back in his chair, pretending casual interest. "Including that song?" She nodded. "Yes. She said it was old, passed down through our family. It always worked on restless children. I don't know why, it just does." Arthur's fingers drummed on the desk. "Interesting. And tell me, Clara, why didn't you mention this ability when you first came here?" Clara hesitated, her gaze lowering. "Because I didn't think it mattered. You hired me to clean, not to sing." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Yet it matters very much now, doesn't it?" For the first time, Clara looked unsettled. "I never wanted to overstep, sir. I just couldn't ignore the baby's cries." Her words were humble, but Arthur wasn't convinced. His instincts whispered that she wasn't telling him everything. "Very well," he said finally, his tone clipped. "You may go." She bowed her head slightly and left the office, her steps quiet. Arthur remained in his chair, staring at the door long after it closed. She was hiding something. He was sure of it. The following night, something strange happened. Arthur was working late in his office when he heard the faint sound of Clara's lullaby drifting through the corridors. Curious, he set his pen down and followed the sound. But when he reached the nursery, he froze. The twins were already asleep. The cribs were still. Yet Clara continued singing, softly, almost to herself. Arthur stood in the shadows, watching. Her eyes were closed, her expression distant, as if she wasn't in the room at all, but somewhere far away. The melody was low, haunting, carrying an emotion Arthur couldn't name. It wasn't just a song. It was something deeper, something that carried weight, memory, perhaps even grief. And as he listened, Arthur felt a chill crawl up his spine. Because for the first time in his life, the unshakable CEO felt powerless. Arthur couldn't sleep that night. Even after Clara had gone back to her small room in the servants' wing, the melody lingered in his head. It wasn't just the song, it was the way she sang it, with a weight far heavier than a simple lullaby. He lay awake beside Isabella, staring at the ceiling, while she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. His empire, his fortune, his reputation, none of those things kept him awake. But one maid and her mysterious song did. By dawn, he had made up his mind. The next day, Arthur instructed his investigator to dig deeper, not just surface-level records. He wanted birth certificates, medical histories, even whispers from the small town where Clara grew up. He wanted everything. In the meantime, Arthur kept his distance, though his eyes followed Clara whenever she passed through the halls. She moved with quiet precision, never drawing attention, never speaking unless spoken to. But now, every gesture seemed calculated, as though she were hiding in plain sight. What unsettled Arthur most was how naturally she interacted with his daughters. Sophia and Helena reached for her whenever she approached, their tiny fingers curling into her blouse, their cries softening the moment they heard her voice. Isabella adored her for it. "She's a blessing, Arthur," Isabella said one evening as she held a glass of wine, her mood lighter than it had been in weeks. "Without her, I don't know how we would survive this phase." "Don't you see it?" Arthur forced a thin smile. "I see it." But in truth, what he saw was something he couldn't explain, something that threatened the iron control he prided himself on. 2 days later, the investigator returned with new information. Arthur read the report in silence, his chest tightening with every line. Yes, Clara's parents had died in a car accident. That much was true. But the details were peculiar. The accident happened on the outskirts of Snow Hollow, only a few kilometers from one of Arthur's early business properties. The police reports mentioned inconsistencies, vague witness statements, but the case was quickly closed. And her grandmother? She had once worked as a maid herself in the mansion of one of Arthur's former business rivals. Arthur's hand trembled as he held the file. Coincidence? Or something more? That evening, as Clara once again lulled the twins to sleep, Arthur decided to confront her. He waited until the babies were quiet, and stepped into the nursery. Clara froze, the last notes of her song fading into silence. "Clara," Arthur said, his voice calm but firm, "I've been looking into your past." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "You never told me your parents died near one of my properties," he continued, studying her face, "or that your grandmother worked for one of my old rivals." "Why?" Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. She lowered her gaze, clutching the edge of the crib. "Answer me," Arthur pressed, his tone sharper now. Finally, she whispered, "Because it has nothing to do with me being here. I came to work, nothing more." Arthur stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Nothing to do with it, or everything?" Clara looked up then, her eyes burning with something he couldn't quite place: fear, anger, or perhaps sorrow. "You think everything is about your world, Mr. Pereira," she said softly, but firmly. "Your empire, your rivals, your victories. But some of us are just trying to survive." Arthur studied her in silence, unsettled by the intensity in her gaze. She wasn't lying, at least not entirely. But she wasn't telling him the full truth either. Before he could push further, Isabella entered the room. "Arthur, what's going on?" Arthur straightened, forcing a neutral tone. "Nothing. Just asking Clara about her lullaby." Isabella frowned slightly, but didn't press. "Well, whatever it is, it's working. That's all that matters." She gave Clara a warm smile before leaving again. Arthur lingered for another moment, then finally stepped back. "We'll speak again," he told Clara quietly, before leaving her alone in the nursery. The following night, Arthur had a dream. He was a child again, standing in the dark corridors of his own childhood home. He heard a baby crying two babies, in fact, though he was an only child. Then came a song, the same haunting lullaby Clara sang. He woke in a sweat, his heart racing. Why had he dreamed that? Why did the melody feel familiar? The memory clung to him all day, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but he did believe in memory-buried truths that resurfaced in unexpected ways. Was it possible that he had heard that song before, long ago? The next evening, Arthur found himself standing outside Clara's small room. He hesitated, then knocked. She opened the door cautiously, surprised to see him. "Sir?" Arthur stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The room was modest, barely large enough for a single bed and a dresser. On the dresser sat a small wooden box, worn with age. Arthur's eyes locked on it immediately. "What's in there?" Clara moved quickly, placing a hand over the box. "It's personal." Arthur's voice hardened. "Show me." She shook her head. "Please, sir. It's all I have left of my family." Arthur stared at her for a long moment, then forced himself to step back. "Fine. But understand this. Clara, anything connected to my family, to my children, to my home, is no longer just yours. It's mine, too." Her expression darkened, but she said nothing. Arthur turned and left, but his mind was already spinning. That box, whatever was inside, was the key. He was certain of it. Later that night, as the mansion fell silent and the twins slept peacefully, Arthur returned to his office. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out at the city lights, his reflection in the glass, cold and sharp. He had built his life on the belief that everything had a price, everything had a reason. And yet this situation, this maid, this song, this eerie calm over his children, was slipping beyond his control. He tightened his grip on the glass. Tomorrow, he would find out what was in that box, one way or another. The next morning, Arthur was already awake before dawn, his mind fixed on one thing, the box. He waited until the household stirred with its usual rhythm staff moving quietly, breakfast being prepared, Isabella still asleep upstairs. Then he walked down the servants' corridor, his steps measured, determined. Clara's room was empty. She was already in the nursery with the twins. Arthur slipped inside. The small wooden box was still on the dresser, worn, scratched, yet carefully kept. He hesitated only for a second before lifting the lid. Inside, folded neatly, were old letters, photographs, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Arthur picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young woman, Clara's grandmother, unmistakably standing beside another woman Arthur recognized instantly. His own mother. Arthur's hand went cold. He rifled through the letters, his heart racing. They were written in careful handwriting, signed with his mother's name. They spoke of friendship, of secrets shared, of children. One letter, dated nearly 4 decades earlier, chilled him to the core. "I don't know how to tell Arthur's father. The baby wasn't supposed to survive. But the lullaby works. It calms her, keeps her breathing steady. If anyone ever finds out." Arthur froze, the paper trembling in his hand. The baby. Footsteps echoed outside. Arthur quickly shoved the letters back into the box, but Clara was already standing in the doorway when he turned. Her eyes locked onto the box in his hand, her face pale. "You had no right." Arthur's voice was harsh but unsteady. "What is this? Why are there letters from my mother in your box?" Clara stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Because your mother and my grandmother were more than friends. They shared a secret one that you were never supposed to know. Arthur's pulse pounded in his ears. Explain, now. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. The lullaby. It isn't just a song. My grandmother used it because it carried something old, something passed down through generations. It calmed babies when nothing else could. Your mother knew that. She begged my grandmother to teach it to her because of you. Arthur frowned, confused. Me? Clara nodded slowly. When you were born, you were fragile. You almost didn't survive your first months. The doctor said you would stop breathing in your sleep. Your mother was desperate. So my grandmother sang that lullaby night after night. And it saved you. Arthur's breath caught. Memories flickered hazy, fragmented. He had always thought his mother's sleepless nights were the sacrifices of motherhood. But now, he whispered, almost to himself. That's why it felt familiar. Clara's eyes softened. Yes, you've heard it before, long ago. Arthur turned away, running a hand over his face. Why didn't she ever tell me? Because your father wouldn't have allowed it, Clara said quietly. He despised my grandmother. He believed her songs were nonsense, superstition. But your mother knew the truth. She kept her close, in secret, until the feud between your father and her employer forced them apart. Arthur's chest tightened. Pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place. The rivalry, the hidden visits, the faint memory of a song he could never place. But there was one thing he still didn't understand. He turned to Clara, his voice sharp again. And you? Why are you here? Clara's eyes glistened with tears. Because when my grandmother died, she made me promise to protect the next children born into your family. She said they would need the lullaby, just as you once did. Arthur's heart pounded. You expect me to believe this? That my daughters need your song to survive? Clara held his gaze. Look at them, Mr. Pereira. You've seen it yourself. No doctor, no machine, no fortune of yours could help them. But the lullaby did. Arthur staggered back, the weight of it all crushing him. He had built his empire on control, on logic, on numbers. But now, faced with a truth that defied all three, he felt small. And yet, he couldn't deny it. The twins slept because of Clara, just as he had once. That evening, Arthur sat in the nursery alone, watching Sophia and Helena sleep peacefully. He thought of his mother, of the letters, of the secret she had carried. And he thought of Clara, the maid who had become something more than a servant, something essential. Isabella entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You look troubled. Arthur didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, Did you know my mother had a song she used to sing to me? Isabella smiled faintly. I've heard the stories. Why? Arthur swallowed hard. Because it's the same song Clara sings to our daughters. Isabella froze, her eyes widening. Arthur continued, his voice heavy. It saved me once, and now it's saving them. Later that night, Arthur called Clara into his office once more. She stood before him, nervous but composed. I read the letters, he admitted. I know the truth now. Clara lowered her gaze. Then you also know why I couldn't say anything. I didn't want to lose this job. I didn't want to lose them. She glanced toward the nursery. Arthur studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, his voice softened. You won't lose it. From now on, you're not just a maid in this house. You're their guardian. Clara blinked, stunned. Sir? Arthur leaned back in his chair, his expression weary but sincere. I don't understand everything about this lullaby, and maybe I never will. But I know one thing. My daughters need you, which means I need you too. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she quickly bowed her head. Thank you, sir. From that night forward, the Pereira mansion changed. Clara's presence was no longer confined to the shadows of the servants' wing. She became part of the household, always near the twins, always ready with her lullaby when the night grew restless. Isabella adored her even more. Arthur respected her, though he never said it out loud. And deep inside, he carried a new understanding, a humbling truth that wealth, power, and empire could not buy peace for his daughters. Only a song could, the lullaby, the same one that had saved him once, long ago. But Arthur never forgot the weight of the letters, the mystery of his mother's silence, the hidden threads that tied his family to Clara's. He kept the box locked in his office, a reminder that not every truth could be controlled, not every battle won with money or strategy. Some truths, he realized, were sung quietly in the dark, passed down from voice to voice, heart to heart. And sometimes survival depended not on power, but on a lullaby